this video, I'm going to walk through how Pitchit can manage a sales process that involves AI agents, taking all the manual work out of the process of qualifying leads end to end, but also maintain TCPA, A2P 10 DLC compliance, CCA compliance, SOC 2 compliance, HIPAA compliance, all throughout that workflow. And so we're going to talk about all the different compliance frameworks, security frameworks, as well as sales process steps that these AI agents can complete on behalf of your sales team. So it all starts with where the lead is coming from. This is such an important part of what you do before you even load a lead into Pitchit. And so today we're going to talk about basically the most common one, which is a form fill, an affiliate lead that you've bought, or some version of form on a website, social media ad, etc. Right? So in this case, Jewel has put in information. The first thing that we're going to do at Pitchit before you even add a lead and start talking to people is we're going to have to audit that funnel. So where does this lead come from? And that's because we need to get toll-free verification if you're going to provision a phone number with Pitchit to text or voice dial someone using AI technology. And so we're going to make sure that that funnel is going to be compliant before you can use one of those phone numbers. If you're going to bring your own phone number and it's going to have a local area code, then you can't just do toll-free verification. You need what's called A2P 10 DLC verification. Now, all of these security frameworks that I'm talking about right now, we have lengthy videos talking about the specifics of each of those policies. So we won't get into those today, but I will mention a couple of them so that you can look at the library for later conversations. Long story short, what we're going to do at Pitchit is if you provision a number with us, toll-free verification is the fastest and has the lowest number of fees for provisioning a phone number, but it still does require looking at what's the use case, where is the funnel, who owns the funnel, who's going to be contacting this lead, and what are you going to be saying? And so we're basically going to do all of that audit before the first message goes out. Now, when the message does go out, we will have gotten through all of the verification, which means that we will have proven that you have prior express written consent. That's another video that we have in our library. That's effectively what everybody's trying to audit with all of these different frameworks before the first call even goes out. Now, when the first call does go out, what we're going to talk about is the most common sales process. So usually people don't pick up the phone, right? So they're going to block the phone here, and then they're going to get a text. This is a little follow-up text. The AI agent has basically identified that the recipient has chosen not to pick up the phone and that we now need to find another medium to get a hold of them. Now, this brings in another security framework and also another policy framework. We can't just text people unless in your prior express written consent language on your form fill, which we audited, you've told them that you aren't just using this form fill to call them, but you're also going to use it for text, email, WhatsApp, and really any other channel that you choose to write to them on, right? And so while we do these audits, we're basically making sure that you do have the right to send a follow-up text like this. Now, in this particular scenario, the text message goes out with AI, and the recipient is saying that they want a meeting at 3 p.m. Central Time today as their reply. The AI agent will be capable of handling the entire conversation end-to-end in real time, really at any throughput, but there are a couple more frameworks that we have to follow, a couple more policies to be compliant. So as your conversations are going on, even if they don't reply, that call that they blocked, the conversation that they're in now in text, all of that needs to be logged and stored and recorded inside of a central system of record, right? And that system of record needs to be ISO, SOC 2 compliant. If you're capturing health PII, then it needs to be HIPAA compliant. If you're in California or reaching Californian CCA compliance, those are all frameworks that we support. And so that centralized system of record that can store and log and record all conversations, it's so critical to any kind of dispute that might come up from TCPA, because the burden of proof lies on the business who is reaching out to the recipient and not on the security vendors and the systems that you're using, right? And so you as a business need to make sure that the people you're working with to handle all of these communications on behalf of your business, that they've got all of these logs in a centralized area, because you probably, depending on your throughput, are going to get some version of a dispute at some point in time. You'll be added to some kind of class action lawsuit, or you'll have someone complaining about repeated unwanted spam. And so having these logs will protect you. That's not the end of it, though. In addition to just storing, recording, and logging it all, every conversation that you have needs to have an up-to-date summary written. And so that's one of the things our AI does is every single message outbound or inbound, we're basically logging and providing insights. So is the lead cold here? Are they warm here? Are they hot here? Do they go back to being cold later in the conversation? So basically, what's the temperature? And then also, why is the temperature? So in this case, the temperature is hot because they gave us a time asking for us to call them at 3 p.m. And therefore, we made another attempt to let them know that we've scheduled the call. That is something that humans are perfectly capable of doing if they only had, let's say, one lead a day. But most Pitchit customers have a lot more throughput than that. And so as hard as it might be and as annoying as it might be to write a summary after every single attempt, that is what TCPA requires. So in summary, we need to basically audit the funnel. We need to get registration of the phone numbers. There's very specific templates on what you can say. There's requirements on storing, logging, recording, and transcribing and scoring and providing summaries on all of the communications, right? And so up to this point, we've already passed multiple different requirements if you want to be compliant, all of which Pitchit's able to handle. And so before we move on, there's one more thing we're going to talk about, which is really the template. So first thing you have to do in any kind of attempt in written or voice-based channels, you have to introduce yourself. So who are you? Why are you calling? And then you can get into your pitch. So really what this business wanted to do in this use case was say, hey, you didn't pick up the phone, but is there a better time of day we can call you back? And so they wanted to say that, but they can't just jump straight into it. You have to say, hi, we are company X, agent name X, calling you because of this reason, then get into your message, right? And so Pitchit's handling that template to make sure that it's all compliant end to end, in addition to some of the other things that we've covered just in this one little slide. Another piece that is really important to include here, and again, the animation doesn't leave enough room for me to put all of this into the picture, but unsubscribe instructions it's so critical that you have those included. If you don't make it easy for people to unsubscribe with every touch point, and if you don't make it required to have a mechanism for opting in the first place, right? Let's just talk about opting in and then opting out. Those two things need to be manual mechanisms that are made really clear at the beginning of your funnel and all throughout. So before this conversation can start, you do need to have a checkbox that basically captures consent, prior express written consent in the first place. And we have some videos that talk more about this, but basically the mechanism needs to require manual involvement to get opted in. It can't be implied. And then when they choose to opt out in a conversation like this, you need to give them instructions on how, right? There shouldn't just be the only option of marking someone as spam, right? And so inside of emails, inside of SMS, inside of WhatsApp, inside of a voice conversation, you need to, right at the very beginning, after you finish your script, you need to explain how they can end the conversation. So say something in your text like reply stop to be unsubscribed, have in WhatsApp and email, have unsubscribe links in your footer. On a voice call, say, in the decision tree of the conversation, say something like, at any point in time, you can let us know to not call you anymore. And all of those things need to be explained to the recipient so that they can revoke consent after a workflow has begun in attempting to get a hold of them, right? And so that's another thing that we have to do. Now, let's move on through the workflow. Pitchit's AI agent is going to do what a human would do in this case, which is basically book a meeting for 3 o'clock on the day that recipient asked for it. Then at 3 o'clock, the AI agent's going to outbound dial the recipient again. And there's one more policy that we've got to comply with here. So as we move through this workflow, all of the manual labor is still taken out of it, but the policies have not stopped, right? And so in this case, the recipient, if they have revoked consent between when they first had that conversation about booking this meeting on Saturday and at the time of the meeting on Saturday, if somewhere in an email, in a text, in a phone call, they have unsubscribed or told you to stop contacting them, you actually can't call them anymore, even if they booked that meeting at 3 and unsubscribed in an email, right? So the new TCPA laws don't care what channel the unsubscribed comes from. Any unsubscribe on any channel is effectively revoking consent for that entire use case on every outbound channel. You basically cannot contact this person anymore. So scheduled meeting or no scheduled meeting, this is a really common trap that a lot of lawyers are going to try to exploit, because it seems from a human's point of view that you should have implied consent to call them at 3 because you have a log that says that they told you to call them at 3, and you do. But what you also have is an unsubscribe or a stop request in between on another channel, which actually makes it so you can no longer outbound dial them at this time. And so Pitchit's AI is not going to fall for a trap like that. We would know to suppress this call because they've revoked consent. So I wanted to make that point so that it's really clear to everyone that there's continued traps at every step in a manual workflow. And so having manual tasks involved in each of these steps is a pretty big risk, especially if the throughput is high. So let's continue through the sales process and assume that this person, let's just say they got busy, it's Saturday at 3, can't really blame them, so they block the call, right? This is where the number of follow-up attempts is such an important thing for anyone's sales process, right? And so Pitchit allows up to 10 times of follow-up attempts. And we've seen a couple of follow-up attempts already with this recipient. We're going to cap it at 10, and that's because there is a policy around repeated unwanted outreach. And so even if this person hasn't necessarily revoked consent, if they haven't replied or if they've continually failed to get to the next stage in a sales process, technically, most of these channels are gonna consider it spam if you repeatedly try to contact them for that exact same use case. And so, no, they have not revoked consent. But if you start getting into like attempt number 16, 17, 18, at some point, you're going to get in trouble because that will be considered repeated unwanted contact. And they consider that the same as spam or fraud, even if it's not spam or fraud in nature and they did request for you to contact them. So Pitchit has that natural limit of 10 attempts built right into it. Most of the companies that use Pitchit before using Pitchit didn't even keep track of the number of attempts. And so this is just a nice safety mechanism to make sure that you don't lose on any given lead because of, attempting them too many times without even knowing that you're over a limit. So moving on with the sales process, they did book that meeting and then they didn't show up. And so we're now attempting to contact them again and see if there's another time we can call them. And this is in the following morning. And so all that follow-up work has led to another meeting being booked now, 5 p.m. Central on Sunday. And so later that night we call them. And this is the first time that this recipient has chosen to actually pick up a phone call. All right, now that you are on the phone with them, there are a bunch of new policies that come into play. The first thing that we've got to make sure we're doing is that we're announcing who we are. And so I can't fit all of the copy into this animation, but I'm going to talk through a really nice template. So the first thing you'll want to do is introduce your name, the company you work for, and then the use case. So basically, why are you calling? And before you even get into what you want to say, you got to start with that. So a good example would be something like, hi, this is Paul Clean from Pitchit. We're calling right now because you had scheduled a time for us to call you today at 5 p.m. Central Time. The other thing you're going to want to do is Pitchit is going to record and annotate all of these calls. And so you need to say that because the reality is there are a lot of local laws around recording and getting consent for recording and how many parties involved in a conversation need to know if a recording is happening. And so just to be safe, it's always better to let them know that you're recording the call because you don't always know physically where that person is at any given point in time. And they might be in a local area where you have to get approval before recording things. And so that's a great template to use at the very beginning, right before even getting into the real purpose, which is that now that this person's on the phone with you and they've finally picked up the phone, you actually want to transfer them to a live agent, or maybe you want to start asking a couple of pre-screened questions like, what's your budget? What kind of products and services do you want? Do you have any questions I can answer? Are there objections that I can handle? Who's your current provider? What are they charging you, to see how we can compare in pricing? That's where you'd want to insert those pre-screened questions. In this example, again, just to keep the copy limited for an animation, I just put in one, which is, can I transfer you to a live agent now to get started? But long story short, those policies, you need to adhere to all of those. And so that's a really important thing that Pitchit's going to make sure you do, is all those templates are going to be approved for those policies. Let's say in this sales process that the person finally says, yes, I'd be willing to talk to a human now, you can transfer me. This is where Pitchit's AI agent is going to warm transfer to a human. This should be the first time that any actual human resources from your business should be used to talk to a recipient, is after they've gone through all of the legwork to get them into a live conversation. You've extracted all of the answers to pre-screen questions, and you've followed all of the policies, security frameworks, TCPA requirements of any national or international or local laws you have to follow. Now is the only time that a human's resources are going to be added in, is when it can have the highest possible ROI for the time spent on an active conversation with a fully compliant, qualified lead, right? And so that's when Pitchit kind of ends. We transfer the call out, but it is not where the actual Pitchit solution ends. It's just where the live conversation will end. We do have a couple more policies we have to file before finishing up with this lead and documenting everything. So the first thing we do is we end the sequence. And so this workflow will end. We won't be contacting Jewel anymore. She'll be marked as a hot lead. We'll put in insights that basically annotate the entire conversation. We'll put in a summary of that conversation, so not just what we said, and if the lead's cold, warm, or hot, but why are they hot? What is the kind of ending summary of that person? And then also just marking that the lead was transferred. Those are all the things that we're going to do to make sure that if you ever do get audited and there is some kind of dispute that occurred that led to that audit, that you've got all the documentation on Jewel end to end that shows everything that happened all the way up to the human being getting involved, and that you were compliant all throughout, right? And so that finally concludes all the work of effectively qualifying a lead end to end, but that's just with one lead, right? And there were tons of policies and manual steps involved in just one lead being qualified. And so imagine if you've got a throughput of 1,000 leads a day, or 5,000 leads a day, or 20,000, 50,000 leads a day, which some of our customers have. This starts to become honestly impossible to do with human labor while being compliant and having to adhere to a sales process that requires a ton of multi-channel communication, both inbound and outbound. And so that is effectively why it is so much easier for a business to leverage AI agents to solve this problem for them. So without further ado, that is effectively how Pitchit's AI agents can successfully qualify leads end to end while adhering to all of the security and TCPA, etc. policies that your company is going to have to participate in. Thanks.